The first thing you want to do is write your name on your loom. I'm writing mine in the corner, but it may actually be better to write it in the middle. This is going to be the back of our loom. We're going to start by taking a piece of embroidery thread, and by carefully pulling the piece that comes out of the middle, you should hopefully avoid knots. So you're going to pull that one out, and then you're going to tape this is actually our warp thread, so you're going to tape the warp thread to the back under one of the notches, and you're going to go down from the notch directly below it to the one that is directly below it, and then you're just going to loop around on the back side so that you can come out again next to the first one that you started. And you're going to continue in on this pattern by going directly down and looping around the back to come to the front. So all of your warp strings that are long should be on the same side. You don't want to have any on the back that are long, and all the little loops should be on the back. So as you go, just double check, make sure that they're all lining up, because it can be pretty easy to skip one and go to another one. Here's an example. I went to the wrong one. I didn't line up correctly. You can see how it gets wider. So if you find that you've done that somewhere, you're going to have to redo it. So the sooner you figure that out, the better. But yeah, definitely is easy to happen. When you get to the very last slot, you're just going to turn it over and tape it down. And one thing I didn't mention is that as you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're pulling everything fairly taut. So you don't want it loosey-goosey, you want it pretty tight. When you're choosing your yarn, most of the yarn that we have has a little string coming out the top middle. So you just want to pull that yarn out until it's about, probably, you can check it about as long as your arm. You don't want to get too long of a yarn because it can get tangled up, but you also don't want to get too short of a yarn because then you're going to be tying a million knots. To thread your needle, they have these large eyes, so you're just going to pop it through there. And I would just go ahead and tie a quick knot on the end, and you'll have to cut it off later, but that way it won't fall off as you're weaving. So this piece of yarn is called the Weft String. The ones we put on there first were the warp, and this is the weft. So you're going to take your weft yarn and you're going to tape it to the back just to keep it secure. And you're going to start with an under-over pattern. And you're going to put your needle through as long as it'll reach. These long ones will go pretty far, so you're going to put it through, and then pull it. And make sure that you pull it tight, and then just push it down so that it's aligning onto your weaving. And then just keep going. Make sure and check where you left off that you're starting with the correct pattern of under over, and go all the way till the end. When you're at the end and you've pulled your yarn and kind of pressed it down with your fingers, the one thing, this is the area to be careful of, is when you're putting it back in and not pulling too tight. So notice though also that I checked for over, and then I'm starting with under. I ended on over, and so I'm starting with under. That way all of my strings are the opposite of the one right before it. And as I pull through, if you pull through higher and then push it down, you're going to be less likely to pull in too tightly. So that gives you some space. And then you're going to continue with your under-over pattern. Now that I've finished with this row, I'm going to go ahead and pull the whole thing down. And then notice, because I had the loop on the end, it didn't pull too tight. So I ended with over, and that means I would start again with under on going through on the next row. Notice when I'm starting in, I pull this kind of cheese-shaped wedge, and then I pull it down. That way it doesn't pull too tight on the ending warp string. Now I've got about 4 or 5 inches left on my yarn, but I know it's going to be easier to tie a knot if I have a longer piece left. So I need to take the needle off. So I'm going to tie this knot by lining up the two ends, wrapping it around 1 or 2 fingers, and then pulling that little yarn through and pushing it up so that it doesn't have too long of a tail. You can do any knot that you're comfortable with, and then you're just going to continue weaving, because the trick is that we are actually looking at the back of our weaving. When we pull this off the loom, all the knots will be on that side, and we can flip it over and the other side will be perfect. So as you're weaving, you're going to pull through, and the knots are just going to end up wherever. It's kind of nice if they end up in the middle, because then they won't be on the edge of your weaving. But as you can see, as I pull this through, I'm going to help this knot along a little bit, but it's going to end up in the middle. We're going to do a practice knot. So I'm going to show you guys really carefully. Then you can really do any knot that you're comfortable with. However, I like this kind of knot because it's kind of easy to do without, like, the normal knot that you would do for tying your shoes. That's a good knot. The only trick is if you do it that way, I usually hold it with my pinkies to secure it, because otherwise it travels a lot, and you will end up wasting a lot of yarn, if that makes sense. But if you can do that one, go for it. So, but I'm going to show you this other one I like, and what you do is you line your old thread and your new thread up against each other so that they're like BFFs. Okay, and then they are going to wrap around 2 fingers. This will be easier if you use a lot of thread. It's so hard, almost impossible, if you have just like a tiny bit of thread. So notice that all of that's like the length of my hand. I have kind of big hands too. So you want to make sure you save a decent amount of yarn for tying your knots. Okay, so notice how these guys are going in front of their loop-de-loop. They're going to go back, and if you do have 2 fingers, you can just part your 2 fingers and pop it through the middle. Whoa, let's see if I can do it. Okay, I got it, and now I'm going to start pulling it through. I am hanging on to these guys, or once you pull your 2 fingers out, you can either just pull tight with both of these, or you can kind of coax this knot up towards the top so you have less wasted yarn, and then pull it tight. Once you have it like this, you're going to take your scissors and trim off the top so that the little tails, the little bunny ears, are a little bit shorter. And then you can just weave like normal. Let's say that you're done weaving and you're ready to tie this off. If you have a tiny one so far, that's okay. You can still tie that off. It can be a little bookmark. If you have a long one, that's great. Just I wouldn't make it, I would give yourself 1.5 inches or so up here at the top. So I wouldn't go past this mark so that you have enough strings to tie. When you know that you're done, you need to have a little yarn on your needle. I have way too much right now, but you want to at least have a little bit. Okay, I fixed my yarn situation. So I have a little yarn left. I'm gonna weave in somewhere in the middle so that I don't want to end on the end, and I'm gonna make my cheese wedge, squish it down. And now to tie off this part, I'm going to insert my needle. Okay, I switched my needle out. You guys, if you had the long blue ones, which are great to weave on this, switch to the little baby size, because the long blue ones are too hard. And it's even harder if you have a short bit of yarn. So I'm going to find this row that's over. See how all these guys are over right here? And I'm going to poke my needle down in there a few times. It's like 4. This is going to tuck in my end and give it some place to hide. And then I'm just going to snip that. And that will be fine. So this edge is tucked in when I do that. Now, when I pull these off, it's going to leave some little loops at the end. So it actually might be super helpful to just go ahead and squish your weaving down, and you'll be able to stretch it out a little bit more when you pull that space off. Okay, so squish that down, and now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut 2 at a time. No more than that, please, because trust me, it makes it so much easier. Go as tall as you can, as high to the top as you can. Even if it's long, that's fine. And there's 2 ways to do it. Do it like you're tying a shoe, where you make a cross, pull it through the loop, knot it, and then do another one. You can do that. Later on, when you're done, you can trim these, or you can trim them as you go to be the size of fringe you want. The other way to do with the knot, if you can get the hang of it, this is a little harder, but if you've been doing your knots this way for the whole project, you'll be fine. So the other way is to make the loop. You're going to pull the tail through the hole, the circle, and here's the tricky part. You want to hang on to this circle and bring it down here to the bottom so that the knot is right next to the weaving. So you kind of want to pull that circle all the way down, and then you have a nice knot. The nice thing about that is that they kind of hold together like a cute fringe, and it's fine. Either one that you do is fine, but that's kind of why I prefer these, but it is a little trickier. So I'll do it one more time. Cut it at the top, just 2 at a time. You make your big loop, pull the tail through the loop, and then you're going to hold on to that loop and pull it close to the bottom, and then I'm going to put my fingers on the top and push that down, push it down until you get that nice knot on the bottom. So now you're going to go ahead and take all these off 2 at a time. Okay, I'm at my last one, and mine is even, and yours probably will be too. Sometimes in some weavings, or maybe you have, for whatever reason, you might end up with 3. And if you end up where you have 3 that are still connected, when you go to tie your knot, you're just going to use these 2 and as one string and tie it. Or, you know, if you're doing that one, it doesn't even matter because it'll all be the same. But I just wanted to give that example in case anybody ends up with an odd number. Okay, so now that I've got this done, I could trim these little guys. And then you're going to flip it over to the back and make sure that the tape is off. And then you're going to pull, kind of gently pull, starting at one end. Okay, so this is what I end up with. I have my tail that's out, so before I do anything else to fix the holes, now it would have been nice if we had left that first tail longer, I'm realizing. But you're going to put the tail on here. And then you're going to do the same thing you did with the other piece, where you find some spot in the weaving where they're all over, and you're going to pull it through 4 or 5 little loops, and then you're just going to tuck that yarn in, and then you can pull out the tail and trim it off just like you did on the other side. Now you have a couple options with these loops. If you like the tightly woven and you like your loops, it could be really cool to outside find a tree, little tiny branch to poke through those to hang it on. We may have some skewers in the art room. There might be a pipe cleaner. You might run a string of yarn through there, and you can make a little like hanger to hang up your tapestry. Or you can just smush this up a bit. And see how I made a little hole right there? That's okay. Just smush it around until it gets to be the good consistency that you want. Now you're going to flip it back over to the back, which is the part that has the knots on it, and put a piece of tape with your name on the back. And then we'll either hang these out in the hall or put them in seesaw, or maybe take them home.